Help us understand why at this moment, when you see the conditions on the ground in Gaza, with now mass starvation, the US is deciding this is the moment to walk away from these talks.
This is not a question of what the United States is doing. It's a question of what Hamas has done. This is a response to what Hamas has done continually.
But that's not the position of many of the Israeli hostage families.
Israel has long accepted a deal on the table, and Hamas has long rejected it. I mean, it's never about been our commitment to a ceasefire. That's never been the question here. We have engaged in good faith to try to achieve a ceasefire. The question has always been with Hamas. That is where the question has been. That is where it remains. And the response we just saw from Special Envoy Witkoff is reflective of that. The question is with Hamas, not with the United States.
What is required of Hamas so the ceasefire can take effect as far as the United States is concerned?
Well, look, there have been conversations on this. I will not go into details of what those private diplomatic conversations have been, but what I can say is it is clear now from our perspective that Hamas does not appear to be coordinated nor acting in good faith. We have approached these conversations with good faith, as has been evident by our comments from this podium and other places, and it is clear now that Hamas has not been acting that way.
And lastly,
yes.
According to news reports and so on, the sticking point was actually the actual entry of aid to Gaza. They apparently did not agree on that. Is that really what broke finally, what forced the United States team to pull out, or because they want to maintain this GHF method of allowing aid into Gaza?
Look, what I can say is what spokesperson Bruce spoke to just on Tuesday, that discussions of the humanitarian situation in Gaza were part of this, and our effort was to try to get those humanitarian corridors in there. That has been a clear effort by this administration, as spokesperson Bruce described. And again, to reiterate, we are seeing aid being delivered despite the actions of Hamas here, and those 90 million meals are to be applauded in terms of that effort. Of course, it will never be enough until we see an end to this conflict, but the entity that is standing in the way of ending this conflict is Hamas. They can release the hostages, lay down their arms, as we have said repeatedly. It is Hamas that is preventing an end to this conflict.
And some acknowledgement from U.S. officials as well that there's real starvation. So is there any, now that the talks have collapsed and so that there's no immediate ceasefire that might relieve the pressure, is there any alternative that the State Department would begin looking at? And then I have just one other follow-up.
Well, a couple points. First, it is progress to see 90 million meals. That is, yes, and that is progress, and I think it is worth applauding, especially given the circumstances under which those meals were able to be delivered. I think another important context of this is that the first victims of Hamas are the people of Gaza. Of course, they're not the only victims.
Well, that's what we're talking about.
Yes, on October 7th. The atrocities that we saw there, many victims of Hamas. We remain dedicated to getting aid into Gaza to the people that actually need it, and we've called from this podium other entities to step up and working through this mechanism in order to deliver aid to the people of Gaza without it being subject to looting by Hamas.
Well, they're volunteers.
A sufficient mechanism for delivering aid to Gaza. I mean, people are still starving to death. Is that enough in the U.S. opinion?
Well, as spokesperson Tammy Bruce has said from this podium before, it is never enough in a war zone. It is never enough. That is why we're committed to trying to get as much aid in as possible. That is why we worked for that ceasefire, because of what we are seeing. But aid needs to be delivered in a way where it is not being looted by Hamas. So, of course, it is never enough in a war zone. But we're dedicated to getting as much aid into Gaza in a way where it reaches the people that need it as possible. And that's why we were working so hard for a ceasefire.
So long as Hamas and the UN refuse to play by Israel's rules for aid distribution.
I reject the premise of that question in terms of how that was set up. This humanitarian catastrophe lies at the feet of Hamas, who could end this conflict today by releasing the hostages and laying down their arms. Hamas.
That suggests that short of Hamas doing that.
Kids are dying. Doctors don't have medicine. They don't have fuel.
This is something that we have dedicated. The president and the secretary have been dedicated to getting as much aid as we can into Gaza in a way where it is not being looted by Hamas. It is something that we...
Short of a change by Hamas, the U.S. government will stand by.
I'm going to answer this question. We have been dedicated to getting those 90 million meals into Gaza in a way where it has not been looted by Hamas. We have been dedicated to getting aid into Gaza. It is something that the Secretary and the President have talked about, worked for. These discussions of getting more aid into Gaza have been part of that ceasefire we are hoping for. But again, the blame of this lies at the feet of Hamas, and that is the fact of the matter.
short of Hamas doing something, changing its behavior, the U.S. government will allow the situation to proceed as is.
The U.S. government is supporting an effort to get 90 million meals into Gaza. The U.S. government is supporting an effort to get as much aid as possible to the people that need it without it being looted by Hamas. That is the actions of the U.S. government in terms of supporting that effort, and we call on others to support that effort to get as much aid as we possibly can. Of course, it will never be enough. It is something we are continually working for, to get more and more aid in what ways we can without being looted by Hamas every single day.
Before the creation of the GHF, it was 400 points where people can access the food. Allow other countries to use this kind of method, especially in northern Gaza, because the 4 points where the GHF is concentrated in the south.
I reject your characterization of Israel weaponizing aid. The only entity that has been weaponizing aid has been Hamas. Through the looting of aid, the weaponization of this population.
Can you say both?
What we have seen is an effort from the United States government, like I said, to get 90 million meals into Gaza during a war zone. We saw efforts.
But that's not enough.
We saw efforts to get to a ceasefire that Hamas has decided not to act in good faith to achieve. That is the reality here, and we're continuing to try to get aid into a war zone that exists only because of Hamas. The war zone exists only because of Hamas, who could end the conflict tomorrow, who is weaponizing aid against the Gaza population. The first victims, as we've said, are the Gaza population.